Now, we're told in the Bible, on many occasions and several times, there's always going to be poor people. And poor people over hundreds of years, even thousands of years, have been exploited. But as a result of exploitation, they have also been provided with God's mighty hand with a lot of good things. What we're going to talk about this morning is in our almsgiving, or our prayer, or our fasting. If you've not noticed in the messages through the Sermon on the Mount, it more has to do with the condition of the heart than it does anything else. A friend of mine, a number of years ago, a preacher friend of mine, told me one time, and it floored me when he first told me, he said, "I'm not sure that God's as interested in what you do as why you do it." And you think about that. And here, in the Sermon on the Mount, it all comes down to the motivation. What motivates us to service? Is it selfishness? Is it pride? Is it arrogance? As we're going to see this morning, is it that being a hypocrite? Because we want to be seen. Have you ever known people that when they do something, they want to take out an ad in the paper? They want their name published. They want a billboard. They want this. They want that. Because they want everybody to know what they've done. I've had a relative or two that was kind of like that. And it's really sad because that's about, well, the Bible says here, they've received their reward. If that's the only reason they do that, if that's their only motivating factor in doing it, then they have received their reward. All of the praise that men have given them. All of what people have done. But what about God? God's not pleased. God's not pleased with that type of thing. And it's not just an individual, it could be a church. If a church has to have the spotlight every time they do something, there's nothing wrong with spotlight, there's nothing wrong with public proclamation if the motives are right. But if the motives are self-centered, and we want everybody to see us, then that's wrong. The scripture reading this morning is taken from Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And Jesus said, "Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound the trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly." Doesn't it happen that way a lot of times? If we don't seek the praise of other men, if that's not our motivation is because we do care about the poor, or we are showing compassion, then our heart's in the right place. You know, most people who give a lot, it doesn't really matter if they're recognized or not. We had a couple of men in my hometown. I've told you about them before. Two very, very well-to-do people. And they were good friends with my grandpa. And there were several things that they did. My grandpa knew about it because he was a close friend. But nobody in the public really knew about it. Things got done and nobody knew. And I think that's the way it ought to be. They will receive reward of the Father in heaven when they didn't seek the recognition of men. You notice that he uses the word hypocrite. In the Greek, it is used for an actor on a stage. On the stage in Greece, One actor might use different masks to carry on different characters, but that's not really who that was. And they used the word hypocrite. Hypocrite is trying to be something that you're not. It's appearing as though you are something when really you're not. You know, when we think about our condition with all of humanity, Paul says in the book of Romans that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and that doesn't leave anybody out. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life." If there are those that are above, then why did Jesus come and die? Jesus died for the entire world. He died for all mankind. And His sacrifice was sufficient for all mankind. And He's the one who is speaking here. This is not something else. This is Jesus Himself speaking these words. But we need to realize in Luke chapter 12, we're going to look at a couple of New Testament verses, but most of our verses are going to come from the Old Testament, book of Psalms and Proverbs. In Luke chapter 12 and verse 1, "In the meantime, when they were gathered together in an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they trod one upon another, He began to say unto His disciples, first of all, Beware you of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, nothing hid that shall not be known." You know, there's one thing. God will reveal all of these things in due time. All of these things will be revealed, and a lot of people who have this attitude, whether it's just using people to get a better position politically or economically or whatever the case may be, they will be revealed one day. One day they will be revealed. They will be known for who they are, and their heart will be known for what it was. And in God's eyes, it's hypocritical. We are in great danger. It is a subtle sin. Vainglory insulates itself into what we do ere we are aware. Vainglory. And that's exactly what it is. And probably a better explanation and a better term for us to understand today is vainglory. I want everybody to notice me. I want everybody to make a big deal about me because I'm the best. Sometimes it's people thinking they're better than others. And that's why I say that sometimes poor people were exploited for the purposes of the rich, for the purposes of the political, for the purposes of whatever the case may be. Maybe even exploited by a government official. And maybe even an entire government. But how many of the people that pride themselves in preaching about the poor really care about the poor? The way that Jesus said we should care. The poor we're always going to have. And as much as we can, we need to reach out and we need to help them. And whatever the case may be. And our almsgiving may not just be money. It may be time. It may be talent. It may be shoulder to shoulder bearing a burden. You may be working with somebody. You never know. But we are to do these things not for public proclamation or recognition. He says that we should do these in private. I'll give you an example. Rick, come here. Okay? This is just pretend, okay? Come here. Rick Walker, I know personally that you have a very tremendous financial burden. I would like to give to you a $1,000 check from my bank account. And I make a big to-do about it being my bank account. And I hand it to you. And I want the recognition of everybody. And I do it in a very public place. He said in the streets and the synagogue. This is a very public place, isn't it? There are a lot of people here. I want everybody's acclamations that I'm giving Rick a $1,000 check. Thank you. That's an example of what they would do as being hypocritical. Their motive was not, they wanted to be recognized by people. That $1,000 was a drop in the bucket to many of these people who did things like that. The things that they gave to the poor is a drop in the bucket. It was just the minimum. They could do a lot more. Let me tell you something about the blessing of God. The blessing of God with a willing heart can do more with a poor person to give more than a rich person could ever give. You think about it. Most missionary Baptists, ABA, for the most part, have been poor, haven't they? A long time. For whatever reason. I say if you live in the South, you're going to be poor. Do you know that? Well, I'm not going to bring that up. That wasn't the case at one time, but it is now. I say a lot of the politicians need to be brought down to Arkansas and Mississippi. Brought down to Arkansas and Mississippi, given a job and work for a wage, and pay a house payment, a car payment, and everything else on what a lot of people have to do with. A lot of them would say, it's impossible. But what do you think about the people you represent? You know, I always thought that it might open the eyes of a lot of those in Washington, and they might think twice about some of the things that they decide to do. But I don't know that it would make that much difference. They would say, yeah, we know. Or they could be like a politician who traveled all the way back from somewhere to the state of Arkansas to vote because he said and was quoted, the people in his region that he represented were too stupid. To me, that right there, that one statement saying the people that he represented were too stupid, that should have got him out of office. I don't know if there's an impeachment for senators or congressmen or whatever, but he should have been impeached. He should have been thrown out. You represent those people. You are the voice of those people. And a lot of politicians don't realize that. But a lot of politicians will do some of what we say here. They are hypocritical in what they do. You tell one group what they want to hear, and you tell another group what they want to hear. But where do you stand? You know, that's my thing. Where do you stand? When a politician gets up and they start and they're agreeing with this crowd and they're agreeing with this crowd, and these two crowds don't agree with each other, you agree with both of them? Where do you stand? Where do you stand on the issues? Chelsea Clinton was quoted this past week as saying that it's very unchristian to think abortion is wrong. A person in the Carolinas was quoted this week who had children and dogs. The dogs were tied to a pole. A storm was coming in. The woman was quoted, "I'll take my children to higher ground and leave them and go back and be with my dogs." We have a warped society today. And I'm sorry, I cannot support someone who supports abortion. It's legalized killing. It's legalized murder in my eyes. And you can take the Bible and prove it all day long. God is not pleased with anybody, any woman who decides to abort a baby. And a lot of times it's for convenience sake. Well, I'm too young. Well, I haven't sowed my wild oats. Well, you know, I just haven't lived any. Well, you should have thought about that before you did the things you did. And I cannot tell you of the numbers of women who have aborted babies who have given Christian testimonies, and it haunts them to their dying day that they gave up that child. A 5-year-old girl walks into the kitchen and looks up at mom and says, "Did you want to kill me too?" Because she found out that her mom had aborted a baby. "Why did you kill my brother? Why did you kill my sister?" What else can you say? But that's the world in which we live. It's full of hypocrites, and it shouldn't be in God's house. You know that? We should stand our ground on the Word of God. And we should be what God wants us to be. Psalm 112 and verse 9 says, "He hath dispersed, He hath given to the poor, His righteousness endureth forever. His horn shall be exalted with honor. The wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash with his teeth and melt away, and desire of the wicked shall perish." You know, God has provided so many things for so many people. He is everything we have. He is everything we are. He is the reason we were able to get up this morning. It is by the grace of God that any of us are even here today. Yet we choose to not recognize that. Proverbs 10 and verse 2. "Treasures of wickedness profiteth nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death." Righteousness delivereth from death. It's not the righteousness of the law. It's not in keeping a creed. It is in having your heart right and being righteous in the eyes of God. A lot of people don't see it that way. The giving of alms is a duty which all the disciples of Christ, according to their ability, must abound in. Must abound in. Proverbs 3 and verse 27. Yep, get the right page here. "Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it." Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in your power, or in the power of thine hand to do it. And you know, a lot of times, have you ever known anybody that was a tightwad? Don't raise your hand. I don't. There was a man that went to church in Louisiana a number of years ago, and he said they had this guy. He worked for some big company. He was like a geologist or some kind of engineer or whatever. Said he made all kinds of money. He said it's been a long time ago. He probably made 6 figures. And this was back like in the 80s. He said he was faithful to church. He was there every time the doors were open. And he wanted it known that he put his dollar in the offering plate every Sunday. A man that makes over $100,000 a year, and he thinks he's doing his obligation and his duty by placing $1 each week in the offering plate. That's $52 a year if he gives every week. Out of $100,000, and yet he prided himself in putting that $1 in the offering plate. You know, one thing that has always bothered me, and I don't know if you've had it here or not, and that's somebody that wants to make change in the offering plate. I've seen it. I understand every once in a blue moon, somebody gets to church and all they've got is a big bill, and they want to change it. I'd say if something like that needs to be done, you need to go back to the vestibule and do it. Don't do it out here. Do it back in the vestibule. But I've seen it. I have witnessed it. But what I witnessed is the same person wanting to do it every week. It's almost like I want people to know how much I give. I want you to understand. And I don't understand that because everybody has an opportunity to go to the bank or have somebody to go to the bank for them or make change somewhere. But to bring a big bill They do it every Sunday. I think it's just show more than anything else. Or they just don't have the knowledge, or they just don't care. But I've seen it. Make change in the offering plate. All I've got is a $100 bill, and all I want to give is $5. They'd be hard pressed to get any change these days, wouldn't they? A lot of people don't give cash anymore. Do you know there's a lot of churches now have a thing where you can use your debit card to contribute to the church? Yeah. I think it's kind of expensive to have, but in a huge church, in a large church, more people will give more liberally if they have the availability to do it with a card. A lot of times. But most churches, people write checks, a little bit of cash. But, that's just the way it is. Is that not being hypocritical in some ways? I want everybody to know that I have this much money and that I can do this every Sunday. I have a real issue with that. A real issue with that. James chapter 1 and verse 27. Wait, that can't. Yep, it is. Wrong chapter. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and keep thyself unspotted from the world. That's pure religion. It's to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. You know how many children are in foster care these days? Every time I turn around, I meet another couple that's got foster children. My question is, where are all the parents? Where are the ones that are responsible for these children? Where are they? Did they just drop the ball and run like my mother did? My mother was the one that left, not my dad. My mom was the one that amscrayed back to Nebraska. And I'm going to tell you, left up to my dad, we both lived with my grandparents for a while until he got married again, but I stayed with Grandma. When she went in the hospital when I was 5 years old, I was with that stepmother for 5 months, and I came back to my grandparents' house, and they said I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Because that stepmother didn't like me, and I didn't like her. Not one bit. For whatever reason, she'd stab you in the back. She was two-faced. I hate to say that about people, but she was. She would do things to me, and then she would tell my dad if I told him what really happened, because I had to stay there all day with her. And I just told my dad whatever she told me to tell him. And that's the way it was for 5 months. And I can remember laying in bed at 5 years old and listening to them arguing. And my dad finally said one night, he said, "One of y'all has to go." I knew who it was, and I was ready. I was ready. Pack my bags. I always thought, and I was thinking in my mind, if I could remember how to get to Grandpa's house, I'd be gone. But I couldn't remember exactly how to get there. Yeah. There are a lot of fatherless children in our world today. It's not that they don't have fathers. It's that fathers have shucked responsibility. And as many mothers too. But that's pure religion. It's visiting the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. And the Bible tells us specific instructions about those who are widows. And it's been said many years ago that if churches would do what they were supposed to do, we might not have a need for nursing homes. I cannot tell you how sometimes it bothers me to no end to hear family members saying, "Well, I guess we're going to have to put Dad in a home. I guess we're going to have to put Mom in a home." And I know what they're thinking, and Mom and Dad aren't that bad off. They just don't want to bother with them anymore. And I'm thinking, what if your Mom and Dad had been that way with you when you got rowdy when you were a kid? He said, I won't have anything else to do with him. I'm just going to send him off somewhere. It used to be a day when elderly people were taken into a child's home and helped raise grandkids. And helped do a lot of things. But those days have kind of passed. And I cannot tell you how many I saw in my hometown. Their children stuck them in a nursing home and they never came back. One lady, I can remember, her kids never came back until she died. And the only reason they came back is to get what they could get. Yeah, good Christian people. Really? How is that good Christian people? You're more concerned about all of this in the world that's going to disappear one day. It's kind of like I told some of my family, I'd rather have my grandparents here. I would not want them here in the condition that they were in, but if they were still able to get around and do everything, I would still rather have them here. I'm not going to fight over their things. Even though my grandpa added me as a fifth child, I'm not going to fight. And I told them I'm not going to fight over it. I said, whatever y'all want, you know, whatever they told you could have, I said, go. I said, there's a few old things that I'd like to have of my grandpa's if nobody else wants them. Because I was not going to fight. But how many families knock down, drag out fights over things? Psalm 41 and verse 1, Blessed is he that considereth the poor. The Lord will deliver him in the time of trouble. If you consider the poor, God will deliver you in the time of trouble. In verse 2, the Lord will preserve him and keep him alive, and he shall be blessed upon the earth, and thou wilt not deliver him unto the will of his enemies. The Lord will strengthen him upon the bed of languishing. Thou wilt make all his bed in his sickness. God will provide for those who serve him. Is that not right? If you're faithful to God, he will be faithful. He's faithful to us even when we're not faithful to him. He provides for us every day when we don't even deserve what he gives us. Psalm 112 and verse 9. He hath dispersed, he hath given to the poor. His righteousness endureth forever. His horn shall be exalted with honor. And we read that a minute ago. All of these things are so true. Back to the New Testament in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 14. In Luke 14:14, And thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. You know what somebody told me a long time ago? They said if a friend comes to you and wants to borrow money, don't loan it to them, give it to them. Depending on the amount and if you can do it. Don't loan it to them. You know why? Because as long as they owe you, there's still going to be that thing between you and that person. If you want to retain them as a friend, just give it to them. If they pay you back, then you're blessed. You're double blessed. Because you still have a friend and you've gotten your money back. But if you never get your money back, if you want to keep them as a friend, don't loan it to them. Give it to them. You know, there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Because every time they see you and they know they own you money, they're going to go the other way. They're going to hide from you. What was the practice of the hypocrites about this duty? The hypocrites would make a big scene. Again, like I said and like I showed with Rick, they would go out in the street, in the public square. They would go anywhere there were a lot of people and make known what they were doing. You know who he was mostly talking about? Who did Jesus have more issue with than anybody else of the religious leaders? The Pharisees. The Pharisees were real quick to let everybody else know what they were doing. They wanted to publicize it. If it was in modern times, they'd take out a billboard. They'd put it on Facebook. Uh-oh. I started to say put it in the newspaper, but how many people even read a newspaper anymore? If they do, they read it online. How many followers do you have on Twitter because you tweeted something or you did something? Would they have been involved in this? I think so. You know, there's a lot of people that blow their own horn. You know what I'm saying? If nobody else thinks they're great, they're going to tell you how great they are. Have you ever known somebody who knew everything and there wasn't anything, well, except for Jacob? But have you ever known anybody that knew everything? And I mean, if you started to, I've had people that have been so insistent that they were more intelligent than me that I would start saying something and they would stop me because what they had to say was more important. Would that be Alexis? Does she stop people? Yeah. She's smart, huh? Yeah. You should have seen how much she ate yesterday. 10 whole plates. Wow. Man, how could anybody... And stay that skinny. If I ate that much, I wouldn't be able to get in the building. Right? Psalm 17 and verse 14. From men which are thy hand, O Lord, from men of the world which have their portion in this life, in whose belly thou fillest with thine hid treasure, they are full of children, and leave the rest of their substance to their babe. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Isn't that a great aspiration? To awake one day with His likeness? Isn't it an honor when other people can see Jesus in you because of the way you are and the way you act and the way you talk? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it a compliment? Isn't it one of the greatest compliments? Luke 16, 24 and 25. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivedest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. The rich man and Lazarus, those who trust in the world, there will be your reward. Is it possible for a child of God to get their eyes off of God and off of the purpose, and their eyes more on the world? Yes, it is. David was one who got far away from God. His son also got away from him. Solomon, who was the wisest man apart from Jesus that ever lived. He got away from God. It is possible. It is a reward, but it is a present reward. It is for here and now. But he said, lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven where rust does not corrupt and thieves do not break through and steal and moth doesn't come and eat it up. He also said, where your treasure is where your heart will be. What's important to you is where your heart will be. And the question today is, what's more important? People recognizing what you do, or God being pleased with what you do? As a child of God, our desire should be to please Him. To please Him. In all our actions, we should be influenced by regard to the object, not the observer. The object is our service to God. As we do things for other people, we should do in our mind and in our heart. We should do like in Christ's name. But we shouldn't make a spectacle of it, as the hypocrites did. What is the promise to those who are thus sincere and humble in their almsgiving? And this can be prayers, because prayer is going to be the next thing talked about. It can be in our prayers or in our fasting. What are we told about fasting? He said, when you fast, don't be like others. Don't have this sad countenance about you, but go on about your life and your business. And don't broadcast it to everybody that you're fasting. This is a way that we can draw closer to God in a desire that we have in our prayer and fasting, in our almsgiving, and all that we do. We should do unto God. But you know what I've encountered, at least in the last 5 years? People who claim to be children of God but have no really desire to serve Him or to please Him. They're more about pleasing self than they are God. My first question is, are you really a child of God? Psalm 38, verse 14 and 15. The psalmist says, thus I was as a man that heareth not, and in whose mouth are no reproofs. For in Thee, O Lord, do I hope. Thou wilt hear, O Lord my God. David cried out many times and wrote most of the Psalms. And we know that David, of all people, he was a warrior for God. He stood for right and everything else. But what did he do? He got mixed up in a scheme. For one thing, he was at home when he should have been in the battle. He lusted after a beautiful woman who was married to one of his soldiers. And he was king, and he took this woman. And she became with child. And they orchestrated a plan to have Uriah, her husband, placed into the heat of battle, and everybody withdraw from him, thus killing him. Premeditated murder. Planning it out, plotting it out. So David had gotten very far away from God. And he cried out a lot of times for God's help, for God's presence. Hebrews 11:6, you probably all know what this says, but without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. God will reward us for the things that we do. He said, you know in the Scripture, let not your left hand know what your right hand is doing. The right hand was used as they were going into the temple, and they put their money in the box as they went into the temple. And sometimes there was a box for the poor. Corbin, there was a box for the poor. But he said, do it in secretly. Don't make change in the offering plate. Don't make a spectacle of your giving. Because if you will give in secret, God will reward openly. Let me tell you something. There's no way that you can give more than God can, or has, or will. You can't. You can't put a dollar amount on it. You certainly can't put a dollar amount on His Son hanging on a cross, bleeding and dying for you and me. Can you? Genesis 15:1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. He was calling Abram to go and sojourn in a land where he had never been before. He was calling Abram to go and do a work for him. And he said, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And you know, we have a great reward waiting for us, don't we? Have you ever heard people talking about folks that are going to get to heaven just by the skin of their teeth? How sad that is. Have you ever known people that have made professions of faith, and for all we know, they are saved, but when they get into church, they do the least amount? They rely on everybody else to do all the work, do all the witnessing, do all the visiting, do all the everything else. And then they want to ride on the coattails of everybody that's done that. You know what the world does that's not fair to the church? They judge the church by the worst member. The one who's not coming, the one who's belly aching about what's going on in church and all this other kind of stuff. That's the one that the world is going to look at. It's not fair, but life's not fair, is it? But that's the way it is. It's just like taking a sorry student in school and saying, well, that whole school is corrupted. That school is not worth anything. That school doesn't teach anybody anything. You can't make that assumption. You don't know. There's too many bright scholars that have graduated from that school and gone on to college and medical school and law school and everything else. You can't judge it by one person, but the world will judge a church by one person. And we've got to understand that. My question to you today is, are you interested in pleasing God? Some people say, well, I can't afford to please God. You can't afford not to. You can't afford not to. Sometimes things happen to rebellious children. There used to be a day, and I was surprised Josiah told me this. He said there's a kindergartner that rides his bus that's already been spanked twice this year. A little boy. I said, y'all spank? He said, yes. He said, our school district does it. I said, all right. They may learn that spanking may not get that boy's attention. It may take something else. I have no problem with that. Do you? But I was reading a thing on Facebook the other day, and they were talking about people who paddled. There was this independent school somewhere in another state that had only if the parents consented. The parents consented, but the article made out if the parents don't consent, then they bully the parents. But it is a private school. He said they said we have high expectations in behavior and everything in our school, and if the parents give consent, they can paddle the child. And the article said that this